Hello, everybody. Jim Welch, Director of Solutions Engineering at NextBillion. In today's webinar, we're going to have about a 15-20-minute discussion about a topic called making the change. Change can be perceived as something that is difficult, challenging, a barrier to moving forward. Hopefully, through this webinar and some examples, I'll be able to demonstrate how easy it is to make the change to NextBillion services in the area of mapping tiles, directions, route finding, and distance matrix calculation. So in terms of our agenda that we're going to be moving forward with, I'll just do a brief couple-minute introduction into NextBillion as a company, background integration, and then we'll dive right into some coding examples where we do a transition of a map tile application that's currently using MapboxGL, and then go through the changes that are necessary to transition that over to a MapLibreGL NextBillion AI powered map tile service or mapping application. Then we'll go on and look at Directions API using a Google Maps Directions API implementation and demonstrate the ease with which you can transition over to using NextBillion AI Directions service and the benefits therein. And then we'll close out with a quick example of making a migration from Mapbox Matrix, which is a distance matrix API, over to NextBillion distance matrix services, and then talk about some of the benefits that you get from using the NextBillion distance matrix service. So just real briefly, the company itself, NextBillion, has been around for a little over 2 years. We are filled with a very talented and a team of experts in mapping and location technologies coming from a lot of different well-known companies. You see those listed there. We're spread out globally and have a customer reach that is global as well. We are venture backed and recently closed our Series B funding. So we're on a really solid footing. And we continue to get honors. It's kind of indicative of our achievements and the technology and the platform that we have. So our premise with NextBillion and our services and technology is that there is inherent benefit to owning your own mapping stack and the ability to have a customized mapping stack that contains elements that are very specific to your business and your operations. So we could start with a decentralized map data set, which can be enriched with your data, third-party data, kind of pick and choose what components go into that. We have a modular framework for integration with that mapping platform, all the things that you would expect to see. And we'll go into that in the next slide with overview of the different tools and APIs that are available. And then ultimately, it's a really cost-effective way to move forward when you start to compare the overall cost and benefits of using a platform from NextBillion when compared to some of the competition out there. So really looking at three main pillars for accessing NextBillion platform. So software as a service platform. We also have the ability to support on-premise deployments or a customer's own cloud service deployments. And so the three pillars identified there, and the one we're going to focus on primarily today, is the APIs and SDKs, primarily on the API side of things. So you see the list and the scope of the APIs that we expose through the platform. Middle tier there, mapping tools, things that can influence the map data set, whether they be a road restriction, a temporal or permanent road restrictions, or regions of a map that can be influenced in a number of different ways. Automatic merging of change sets within a map data set and the ability to intelligently merge and conflate different data sources into a comprehensive map data set. And then on the right there, just the ability to host and manage and provide services around this custom enriching map, extending map data, and really customizing it for a customer's operations and production. And what does that get you ultimately? Better economics, gross margins, a reduction in your overall operating costs, ETAs, which are more accurate and tuned and optimized to your fleet's operational movement, and leading to hopefully higher driver and customer sentiment because of all those factors in improving overall ETAs. So the first example we're going to go through is a map tile service. And we're going to start with a Mapbox implementation, which is using MapboxGL. And there may be a number of reasons why you're looking to switch or looking to change. One of those might be related to terms of service, licensing. The original MapboxGL had a fairly liberal open source license that was available to the open source community. There was a transition around 2.0 MapboxGL, and a new terms of service and license agreement went into place. And that's at the point where MapLibre forked off of MapboxGL, maintained the open source license. It continues to be community supported, a very active community of maintainers of that open source. So what we're going to talk through today is if you're at some point where you're looking to make a move, a migration from using MapboxGL over to MapLibreGL, I can just show you how easy it is to make that switch and to couple that with leveraging NextBillion mapping services. So we'll transition over to some coding views now. Okay, so here we are with our map switch project. We're going to start by just creating the scaffolding for a basic React application using the Create React App application. So you can see it going through the process here, and if you look at the Project Explorer view over to the left, you'll see the files being created as I'm doing this. So now we're pretty much complete with the overall scaffolding for just a default React application. You can see all the files have been created. We're going to go ahead and move into the project directory called map switch. And we're going to take a view of the package.json, which describes the project and all the requisite dependencies. And I'm going to go ahead and add the MapboxGL dependencies here right up front. You can see just the two that are listed there. I'm going to drop out and do my node package manager installation. So installation of all the dependent libraries, including the MapboxGL components, even though I'm not going to use those right away. So now I've got just the basic app. If I go ahead and do an npm run start, I should get just the generic React application loaded. So I haven't done anything with mapping yet, just have all the basics in place that are needed to run the application. And now I'm going to do what it tells me to do, which is edit the application file. So I've gone ahead and done that and created just what the basics necessary, including the Mapbox access token, mapping style from Mapboxes to standard streets, and go ahead and compile that, run it. And what we should see is the change in the default React app over to just a simple map presentation powered by MapboxGL. So now the next step here is to see how easy it is to make a switch, move over to the open source MapLibreGL using NextBillion Map Tile services. So we're going to revisit our package.json. We've got those two lines, if you recall, that had MapboxGL definitions as dependencies. And I'm going to switch those out very easily for the required MapLibreGL references. So you can see there, very simple change. And we need to just do our npm install once again. So we're swapping out the MapboxGL dependency with MapLibreGL. So that's all set. And now we're just down to small code changes. And we'll start by importing the MapLibreGL as opposed to the MapboxGL. No need for this access token from Mapbox anymore. Change this out to a MapLibreGL reference. And then we'll change our map style, pulling the tiles and the styles, the glyphs and the sprites and all the good stuff for the map. We'll be pulling that from NextBillion, giving it a URL that is defined by a NextBillion style. And finally, we're going to change the export to something more appropriate. Change the naming from MapboxGL to something that's more descriptive of this, which is using NextBillion and MapLibre. And then we'll change the definition down below here. So at this point, we've done everything that we need to do. You can see there's just a small number of changes. We can do our npm run start once again, and we should have a new version of the map presented, which is taking advantage of MapLibre and the NextBillion mapping tiles. So there we kick that off. We'll say yes. And now you see we've got the new version of the map tile powered by the open source MapLibreGL and tiling services from NextBillion. So the next thing we're going to look at is migration of a direction service implementation or route finding service based on Google Maps to something that's using NextBillion direction service. So with Google Maps, there's some things to consider, and we do hear this quite often from different customers. So you have a limited number of routing profile types that you can take advantage of within Google Maps, and of that set, there are no profiles for truck routing. No real ability to differentiate your map data from, say, your competition. Anyone using Google Maps gets the same version of the map and has no ability to add or really take advantage of private content from a routing standpoint. And another thing we hear quite often is just overall access and touch points within customer support can be somewhat challenging. So at NextBillion, we do support multiple routing profiles, including customized versions of routing profiles. Obviously, we talked earlier about customized map data, and that map data can surface attributes into routing profiles to tune those routing models to very specific business needs. And then lastly, just the ability to access customer support is, we have a lot of touch points with customers on a daily basis, and we consider ourselves to be very accessible. So let's go ahead and dive into the project, take a look at how simple this change is to make. So similar to the previous project with the map switch, we're starting with something called direction switch, and we're just going to go through a standard creation of a node project, and we just step through and defaulted all the answers. And all that does is really just create our template for a package.json. I'm going to go ahead and add the dependencies for the direction switch project. And there aren't a whole lot. We're going to keep it this example extremely simple and just give you a sense of just a simple Google Maps implementation of the direction service. So you see us importing or adding that dependency, taking the latest version of the Google Maps service JS. We're going to use Axios, not necessarily Google Maps uses Axios, but I'm bringing it in here for later. We're going to go ahead and do the npm install. And I'm just going to create my index.js, which is going to be my main node application for this example. Now that I've got that file created, I can just add in the required code. I'm going to uh, add in the Google Maps services. I'm going to add my API key for Google Maps. And then you can see there we're just doing routing between an origin and a defined destination. And when I execute that using node index.js, I'm going to pipe that through something that can read the JSON that comes back. And you can see here we've got valid directions, a valid route delivered by Google from that origin to the destination. Pretty simple. So now we're going to take the necessary steps in order to very easily migrate this to an API call that uses NextBillion direction service. So we already added the dependency for Axios, which we're going to use just for our HTTP API call. And there you see I defined my API key for NextBillion, my NextBillion endpoint, and then I'm going to do a HTTP GET to the direction service defined by directions/JSON, same origin destination pair. I'm going to add some additional details. Our documentation provides some details on other parameters that can be added in here. But just for simplicity, we're just going to output, again, we're going to do the same thing, node index.js, pipe it through something that can render the JSON in our terminal. And you can see, similar to what the output we had gotten for the Google's direction service, uh, a valid route between that origin and destination pair. And that's all there was to it. Quite a simple change. Okay, now we're going to close out with an example of migration of a distance matrix service, migrating from the Mapbox, what they call matrix service, over to using NextBillion distance matrix service. So with just pointing out some of the things that might lead you to want to explore distance matrix services from NextBillion, here are some things to consider. Within the Mapbox matrix service, there's really no time dependent calculations. So when you're sending it the origin destination, the set of points, the routing is sort of a singular time view. It's also limited to 25 total points, so a symmetrical matrix of 25 by 25 would be the maximum that you would be able to extract from the Mapbox matrix service. With NextBillion, you can pass in a departure time as a parameter in the request, so you can do future planning, allocate or calculate your distance matrix based on a certain time of day. Maybe it's the time that your deliveries are going to be conducted versus the time that the planning is occurring. We support large size distance matrix, which is we get really getting a lot of traction with our ability to support and have large distance matrices supported in a scalable and performant fashion. So with that said, we'll dig in and take a look at how easy that switch is to make that change from Mapbox to NextBillion. So here we go once again, starting with a empty project. We're calling this one Dist Matrix Switch, and we're going to create just the framework for a node application using the npm init command. So that'll create our template for the node project. You see me taking all the defaults here. Creates the template for the package.json. And we're going to go ahead and add in just the basic dependencies that we require for the distance matrix application that we're creating. And as a starting point, we're going to create what someone might be using for a Mapbox implementation of distance matrix. And so just the dependencies added there, and then we'll do our typical npm install to add all those dependencies. You see that kicking off there. Now I've got the node modules. You see that in the Project Explorer, so we know that everything's been installed at this point. I'm going to add a project directory here, just another folder, just call it data. and I'm going to bring in a GeoJSON file that defines a polygon in the Los Angeles area. So what I'm doing with my distance matrix application that I'm creating, I'm going to be creating a random set of origin destination pair, or origin, just random set of points that are going to feed the distance matrix. And I'm using this GeoJSON file in Los Angeles as a reference point. So you'll see how we randomize the points in that file later on. So next I'm creating my application file index.js, and then I'm going to go ahead and add the um, application code with the Mapbox implementation and drop that in here. So there you go. Just did a quick paste. Nothing really exotic here. Just the definition of the API key, the access token, the API endpoint from Mapbox. And then you see me do the import random points on polygon. So that's using that LA GeoJSON file. By default, I'll do 6 points, but I can pass it arg value to set the number of points I want to set. And then this is just all formatting of the points I'm passing in. And you can see I'm using Axios to do the API endpoint call and then processing the response back from Mapbox. So that looks all good. Pretty straightforward. And now we're just going to run it. I'm going to say, give me origins. So this is a 3x3 matrix. And so you can see there I randomly generated those points. And we got a response back from Mapbox for that 3x3. Now I'm going to say, give me 5. Okay, similar answer, 5x5. No problems there. Very quick. Now I'm going to say, give me 26x26. And now you can see that that becomes an error. Too many coordinates. Maximum number of coordinates is 25. So now we're going to make the necessary code changes to transition this over to using NextBillion Distance Matrix services. I'm going to change out the API key to a valid NextBillion API key. And then obviously need to modify our API endpoint to the NextBillion direction service. Done that there. Everything else pretty much stays the same. Need to change some formatting of the data based on whether something is presented as long lat as is done in Mapbox, or lat long as is done in the NextBillion service. So I'm just changing the index on an array there for the randomized points. And then here we're going to do, here we just need to also change the delimiter for the points. And within NextBillion, we're going to use a HTTP post. So we're going to need to define the change out from the get that's being used for Mapbox. I'm going to add the definition for the body of the request there. Again, just the same points. It's a symmetric distance matrix where origin and destinations are the same. So we get this similar type of implementation that we did with Mapbox. And then we'll just change out the Axios get to a post, HTTP post, and then process the output. So very similar type response that we're getting. Now you'll see here that now that we're ready to run this, I'm going to run it the same way. Node index.js. So this is a 2x2. And pretty simple. Expand that out to something a little bigger, 10x10. Going past the limits of my terminal here. Now we're going to go 200x200. There we go. We got that back. And let's get crazy. And let's do a 750x750. And there you have it, a very large distance matrix calculation powered by the NextBillion services. So I hope you were able to see how easy it was to make a switch, make the change from using your existing provider, whatever your reason for change. We'd love to have a conversation with you, discuss, and I hope you found this useful, and keep on mapping. Thank you.